what do you think about looking to change our voice? Do you think that's a good thing? Should we look to improve upon our speech?
I think that's a tricky question to answer because there's a yes and a no. I think there are places where we need to be aware of the power of language in shaping people's perception of us. And whether we speak with a non-standard accent or a standard accent, we all have a repertoire in which we, change the way we speak depending on the audience we're speaking to. So everybody has that kind of style shifting as part of what they do. For people with non-standard dialects, the pressure on them to switch to more standard speech is much greater, obviously. And so there can be a lot of questions about authenticity and identity tied up with that when you're asking people to change speech that is about community and family and friends and love, which is where they come from, and get rid of it. That can be a really hard thing to ask people to do. So I don't necessarily ever think we should tell people to lose those identities that come with the language of their youth or the language that they speak with at home with friends. But I do think that people need to be aware of the constraints that might end up being put on them because of the dialect they speak. And if they can learn some flexibility to adopt other speech styles in contexts in which they're needed, that can be advantageous to them. But it depends on someone's goals. I don't think there's a right answer to that in the sense that everybody should ever shift, but depends on your goals and what kinds of employment you want and what kinds of, life opportunities that you're interested in, because you can do very, very well with an accent that is very sort of regional or social, and that will be all you need in your life, and it's what you really want and where you're supported. And then other people will really want jobs or opportunities that are linked to standard speech, and in those cases, absolutely, I think it's helpful if you're able to adopt those standards. So I guess there's no right or wrong answer to that. There's a
Mm.
yes, it depends answer to that.
Yeah, I was just thinking then it's almost like I wonder if there's like, a bit of a bell curve in terms of like because if you think of when you're starting out in the workplace or whatever, people might want to get, dressed up in a suit and make a good impression when they're younger. And then, but as you get older and you've, got a bit of experience, you've actually stacked up, oh, I'm good at these things, so I don't need the suit anymore. And I mean, and I wonder if it's almost similar in that kind of that more regional thing where you're when you start off, if you go straight in with this harsh accent or whatever, and you haven't gained a reputation or whatever, then that might get lost. But then later on, because I noticed it with myself actually, whereby, and I'm very aware of how I'm speaking now because I definitely have. I'm probably not as a how should I say it? I'm adjusting my speech a little bit now because I know I'm speaking to you. Because no, sorry, not because it's you, but because you're American. So I probably have this like international tone.
Okay.
But like just and now I'm talking about it's making it worse. But I think because I'm from the north of England, I'm trying to like talk like I would normally talk now. So because I'm from the north of it, like it's a bit more relaxed, right?
Right.
But I think as you gain a bit of experience, you realize, like you were just saying, that actually there's real value and beauty in the accents that we have. So,
Right. And connection. It speaks to connection in a way that speaking sort of the posh accent doesn't necessarily get us. In fact, when we look at studies, people might think, okay, yes, those accents, those posh accents, RP, for example, or, standard broadcast American English are the ones people should speak in, high level jobs. People have those attitudes. But when you ask them who you want to hang out with, it's rarely the people that have standard speech. It is more often those people whose language says something about who they are as a person. And those
Mm.
regional accents, those social accents, they speak to us in terms of the quality of the people, right? That's why we often associate working class accents with salt of the earth, authenticity, toughness, ability to roll up someone's sleeves, the earthy kind of sense. And we really like that as well. So I think there are different values that we put on different accents.
Mm,
And I absolutely agree. Once you kinda get in the door and you've established yourself, the pressure on your speech decreases. But what's really interesting is, when we look at studies of how people judge other accents in an employment context, for example, younger speakers, so in employment situations of hiring managers or things, when those jobs are occupied by younger speakers, they tend to be more flexible in listening to non-standard accents in employability contexts. The older you get, the less flexible you are about hiring in those ways. So while you might yourself be more free to use your local accent, it does seem like your sense of whether it's appropriate for younger speakers to be using it actually hardens and you're less flexible. So it's a really interesting trade-off that we see.
mm. And the person I'm thinking a lot about as well is Chris Williamson. Now you were on Modern Wisdom a couple of years
Yes.
ago, right?
Huh?
And have you ever? I'm sure you spoke to him about accent, but have you ever listened to some of his really early episodes?
No, but he had told me that he has sort of worked on his accent, because I think
Yeah.
isn't he from the North as well or West
So
Country?
I'm
Um,
I'm northwest. He's
um,
northeast. So
Northeast.
we were talking off air about Northumbria. So he would be like the other side of that.
Right, yeah, so I remember we had a conversation actually about how he was very aware of his accent and had sort of consciously, especially in his earlier days, tried to eradicate some of the really strong markers of that, but also
Mm.
appreciated how they were kind of about who you are at the same time. So I have not listened to his early work, but we did have a conversation about that.
It's interesting actually. If you get a moment, just listen to like the first few episodes, and it's like wow, they're totally different.
That's
And it's
funny.
like I don't know if I can do a Geordie accent. Well, he's
Oh, does he have a
yeah.
Georgia accent?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't think he's from Newcastle. I think he's from there's is it Middlesbrough? Might be Middlesbrough, but it's kind of Geordie's kind of. I don't want to do it on air because I'll mess it up. I love doing accents, but the idea of doing it on air now, while we're talking about, and if it got back to Chris, he would
Yeah, you don't want
probably
a record of it, right?
yeah, exactly. But yeah, interesting. And but part of me did feel like a bit sad,
Right, because
for
there's a
his old
lot.
accent.
There's a
Yeah.
loss, right? I mean, that this is the constant pressure we're under as speakers, and for some people, it's much stronger because they have more to lose, when they're shifting. So I was born no, my parents are actually both French speaking natively, so, I didn't really have American English speaking families, but I was born into a, middle class background, and I went to school with a bunch of middle class English speakers, and I was actually raised in the South, and so a lot of them had Southern accents, but I didn't ever face this choice between a regional accent, because I didn't get a Southern accent, and a national one that might actually have hindered my, future progression. Southern accents in the United States, like Northern accents in the UK, are considered less sort of upscale, less posh. There's often jokes about Southerners in the United States. And, a lot of my friends had very Southern accents and they felt really embarrassed by them when they left the South. And I never had to face that because I didn't have one coming up. So certain speakers, just by virtue of where they're born, the class they're born into, the race they're born with, have to face much harder decisions about that trade-off. And, you're losing part of your social identity when you're losing your accent. You might be
Mm,
gaining something, and every speaker has to evaluate that balance for themselves. I don't think there's a good way and a bad way. It's not bad to want other things. It's not bad to not want other things, but it is a personal choice that every speaker, especially those that come from less standard backgrounds, have to weigh in every situation of their adult life. And so, there is a cost to that.
mm. Yeah, I was thinking then about one of the things I thought when I started the podcast was that I wanted to make sure that everyone could understand me, because it's a global thing.
Right.
So, kind of just taking the little bit of an edge off some of it. It's like still have a northern accent. You can hear it there, accent, like,
Right.
instead of,
Yeah.
but kind of like just smooth out some of it. But I wonder whether I was thinking about someone like Theo Von.
Who's
Do
Theo
you,
Von? I'm not familiar.
so he's a big podcaster actually, but he's mainly a comedian,
Oh, okay.
and he's got a real Southern accent, you know, like I went
Right.
for it,
You did it. I
but
like it. And now you're on record.
yeah, but you know, but everyone loves him for that. He's got a huge following in the UK. But I do wonder whether maybe we're just, because we grew up watching so much American TV and that accent would be portrayed a lot, that we can just understand it a bit better. Um, but having said that, I don't think there's any English dialect that an English speaker would not understand.
Oh, I think, a lot of times you'd be surprised. A lot of Americans say when they go to Scotland, for example, they can't
Yeah,
that they're like, "What is what are they saying?"
yeah.
I think northern accents for Americans because they're more used to Southern Southern English,
Mm,
not Southern American English. That is sometimes northern accents are a little more difficult, especially when you throw in more regional kind of accents and more
mhm,
status, kind of lower class accents that Americans are simply not as familiar with. There's a lot of research that suggests we have expectations about how people will sound, and when the people sound different than our expectations, there's an actual processing cost that our brains have to kind of devote more cognitive resources to processing it. And so that can disrupt how well we understand that speech until our brain gets better at processing it. So I think you'd be surprised at the number of English accents that people might not have experienced very often that are a little more distant from their own accent than others. And that causes some processing problems when they first encounter it. But I will say that it's almost always the case that after a few days, you're much better at it, and then you would say, "Oh, yeah, it's fine."
mm. You've got a new book coming out
Yep,
on the
excited.
subject of accents. What surprised you in writing this book?
I think I've worked in accents. That's really the bread and butter of what my work has been for the last 20 or something years. I'm slurring it so no one knows how old I am. But I've worked in accents, regional accents in particular in the United States. So it really was a passion project for me, this book. So it wasn't surprising for in terms of the content because a lot of it I've been teaching for years and researching for years. But I think some of the things that I found that were revealing to me were some of the more quirky parts of accent that I wanted to cover that most of the times you wouldn't put in a book on accent. So in addition to covering, the trajectory of accent, so how have we come to have the accents we do from the time of proto-language speakers? So from ancient humans to today, I kind of trace how the accents developed, why we have them, why they're actually purposeful, why they've actually been beneficial to us as humans over time. And then a lot about how children are really crucial in the formation of accents and sort of the interaction between parent and child, but also peer group and child, and how that really parlays into the accents you'll have as an adult. So those are sort of the bread and butter of the things that I do, and those were not that surprising to me because I work in that area. But I also wanted to do some fun stuff. So, what are things people ask about accents, or what are things about the way we sound that people comment on? That I didn't necessarily teach in, so I didn't know that much about those topics, although I might know, why it happens. I don't really understand the history. So one thing I have a whole chapter on, which might seem weird until you read the chapter, is why. And I don't know if this is true in Britain, but in America, people hate the word moist.
Okay.
It's like
I
aggressive to hear. It's a
I think I've maybe heard this before, but like it's not a big thing.
So when I did some research into why we hate the word moist so much, I really, I realized it can actually relate to something called sound symbolism, which is this idea that there is sometimes an intrinsic reaction to sounds that we have, either that the sounds themselves have some sort of meaning, absent the word they're in. So just a sound carries some sort of meaning that seems to be kind of a primordial meaning to humans, and that might have helped with the evolution of language way back when. Or it can be that we have an aesthetic kind of reaction, where it's though pleasant or not pleasant or grating or harsh. So it's more about an emotional response to sounds. And so what I did in looking at the word moist is that actually a lot of the sounds that make up the word moist are ones that historically seem to bother us, and that might be why we hate that word. So it was a fun journey for me to kind of trace the history of moist and then try to put some of the principles of linguistics to work in explaining why this one word seems to bug us so much. And then
So
there's
you're
the
gonna
opposite.
have to tap into that a little
Lovebird.
bit more for
Oh,
me.
I don't know.
This
I might
moist.
make you have to wait for the book. No. All right. So moist has a lot of problems. I mean, it's a problematic word. One is that for centuries, since about the 1400s, it's been used to describe medical situations or medical conditions where you would describe things like pus or gangrene as moist. And no
Mm.
one wants to talk about moist gangrene, right? That's not a pleasant thing to talk about.
Puss also. When you said puss, like part of me just was like, oh.
Ew, right? You're like, ew, it just grossed you out. So, and
Yeah.
pus is also a medical nasty word, and we don't like it. No one's going to say, oh, yes, pus is my favorite word. It's not going to happen. So moist had that it wasn't going for it well, right? Now, before that, if you look at how moist was used in the, times of Chaucer and before that, it was actually used to describe, it's from French, it's from Old French. It was used to describe things that were fresh, not things that were, damp.
Sure.
So when you describe beer, for example, like Chaucer talks about moist ale, meaning fresh ale. So it was good. It was a positive thing. But then, about a century later, it starts getting used to describe medical conditions. And that makes it semantically or from its meaning perspective, less attractive a word. So you have that's already operational in the meanings of moist. And then, of course, in America, I don't know if this is true in the UK, but in America in the 1950s and 60s, it gets used in boys' locker rooms to describe underwear. That also is not a bonus for moist. Doesn't make it a more popular word for especially most women. And then on top of that, it has these sounds. So M sounds are what we call bilabial sounds. So if you make an M sound, this is where you have to participate and make an
Um.
M sound for me. Okay.
Um.
If you notice, your lips are coming together, right?
Okay.
So
And what's that called
and
again? Say
it's
that
called
word.
a bilabial. So two lips. So labial means
Bilabial. Okay. Yeah.
ba is two. So it means two. It's a two lip sound. And so you go ma ba ma ba. Those are both bilabial sounds, and there is
Mm.
a sound symbolic correlation between ma ba sounds and babies suckling at the breast,
Mm.
which is one of the reasons why the word for breasts around the world in very kind of early language, when you look at not all the words that have emerged for that, but some of the earliest words that emerged for that all start with M or B sounds or P sounds because they are bilabial sounds and they seem to relate to children suckling at the breast. So while that might be a
Mm.
beautiful thing if you're a nursing mother, it's not really what we want to have an image of when we're describing cake, right? Moist cake. That's not a positive association. So that's another strike against it. And then the ooh vowel, if you go ooh,
Ooh.
all right, so that's a back of the mouth sound. So the tongue is kind of gesturing towards the back of the mouth. And it's also stimulating muscles that are the sort of opposite of smiling muscles. So if you say
E.
you're smiling, right? So it's
Yeah.
kind of stimulating the smiling muscles. But if you go, ooh, that's a
Ooh.
right?
Yeah.
That's a frowning thing, so it's
Yeah.
stimulating the frown muscles. So that we also find there's a correlation between back vowels, which "oo" is a back vowel, or oi is a back vowel, as well, that it sort of stimulates a sound symbolic association with something depressive or big, or not so pleasant. Probably because it's stimulating muscles that are used in frowning versus E. When you have people go E, 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 they actually report higher levels of happiness on some tasks. So there does seem to be some relationship between the vowels that we use, and moist just has, a double loss, because not only does it have an M sound, which we associate with suckling babies, but it also has an oi sound, which we associate it with sort of more depressive, larger, kind of less fun sounds. And so moist gets a double whammy because its meaning is about things that are negative or medicinal, and its sounds are about things that are less pleasant. And so when you say that word, it has unpleasantness associated with it. So it was a really fun chapter because it seems like a silly topic, but it's actually quite fascinating.
Yeah, I love that. I I'm as you're talking, then you were
You
telling.
never call moist chicken moist again, will you now? I've killed that
No.
word for you.
No, definitely not. Yeah, moist. I feel like I don't use that word often, but yeah,
Now
when
you
I
know.
was when you were telling me about the ooh vowel,
Uh-huh.
and then I was kind of, I have this thing where, well, I don't do it often, but I'll go and then I'm like, oh, is that a bit ooey? And I'm like, and I didn't want it to sound negative, so let's talk about ums and hums.
So those are called back channels. We call those back channels,
Back
right? Because
channels.
what they're doing is they're kind of a back channel way of indicating listenership to the person that's talking, right? So you usually do that when someone else
Oh,
is
like, I'm here.
right, and it's just,
Okay.
I haven't fallen asleep yet, so keep going is sort of what. And there's some interesting work on, how back channels can actually indicate different things about listenership. So you can have engaged back channeling where someone's talking, you're like, yes, and you're nodding and you're providing vocal, verbal, keep
Yeah.
going cues. Or there's delayed back channeling, which is when someone's talking and you do, mm-hmm. Mhm. Where it doesn't come where you expect it to be encouraging. So it actually is communicating, I'm really bored, I'm barely listening. So they're actually the same feature,
Wow.
can communicate different things, but I think the way you're intending it actually is a positive thing. And not
Yeah.
the funny thing about sound symbolism is it doesn't actually seem to affect most languages in daily interactions, because they're very kind of proto-language emotions that we have, but experience with language absolutely overrules sound symbolism. So babies may respond more to certain sounds because of some built-in intrinsic meaning that sounds have taken on. But as adults, we've learned different positive and negative associations with words and word meaning and
Mm.
sounds. And so, is something that we like to hear. No one wants someone not to say anything when they're talking. And so our positive association with back channeling, as long as it's good back channeling, is going to overrule any very basic, fundamental, prehistoric types of emotions we might have about a sound. And also baby suckling can be a lovely thing. It's just not when you're describing cakes and chicken. So, it's a very complex idea of what makes certain sounds unattractive to us.
If you're anything like me, you're probably good at starting habits, but fail to stick to them over the long term. There's probably one or two, whether that be going to the gym or taking the dog for a walk, but struggle to maintain others around career, relationship, or life goals. If you're a long-term listener of the podcast, this won't be the first time you've heard me talk about habits and leveraging public accountability. That's why I created InDeep, the tool that helps you build healthy habits and stick to them. After creating your free account, you'll be given your own personal public profile link, which you can share with your friends, your family, coach, or followers. And when someone clicks that link, you'll be given a real-time notification that someone is watching your habits. I can't tell you how much of a motivator it is when you're stuck in a procrastination cycle and this little eyeball pops up with a number next to it. My productivity has gone through the roof since I started using it. It's that effective. Luckily for you, I'm giving away 100 free VIP months to my podcast listeners. There's no credit card required. Head to indeep.com/podcast. That's deep with two I's, INDIIP.com/podcast, or follow the links in the episode description below. Let's start crushing our habits today. It's so interesting, and obviously, as a podcaster, it is an art form, and even that, like the right amount of mhms, and like, is what how much is too much.
Right.
And it's probably, I don't actually really think about it that much, but obviously there will be a different cadence given the excitement or whatever, as you rightly say. I was thinking, I've heard, actually, I don't know if it's Chris or it might be Tim Ferriss, other podcasters, like, oh, I listened to one of my early podcasts and I kept on doing this annoying thing and I kept on going, mm-hmm. And he was like castigating himself for doing it, and like uh s- rolled it back loads. But again, I wouldn't have noticed that. But then when you bring attention to it, you know
Well, when you're one of the things I've noticed in doing a lot of interviews is people in radio and podcasters are extremely self-aware of language because they have to listen to themselves all the time in a conscious way that most average speakers don't. So all of us do these things. And in fact, what we don't realize is how much they are really supportive to conversation. If you talk to people, we have expectations about how they're going to behave as listeners. And if you just sit there staring at someone with no emotion and no noise, that's not going to be a pleasant conversation. But when you're recording yourself and language is really more primary in terms of the, professional job you're doing, you notice all those things in a way that you don't as an average speaker. You notice every time you do something, and especially in a context where you're recording something and going to play it back later, you've already had the interaction experience when you're not in your head as much about what you're saying, and then you're listening to it as a observer, and that brings a whole other realm of how you're evaluating your speech when you're listening to yourself in an observational capacity. And that's what I tell people who are worried about their use of things like or ums and uhs. A lot of times those are things that are just we fall back on as natural parts of habits we've learned. And there's nothing wrong with them. In fact, there's a lot of really positive things that come from using ums and uhs and likes, but sometimes people over rely on them or they feel very self-conscious about them. And you are really not a good judge of your own speech while you're speaking because there's a lot of cognitive resources being spent elsewhere. You're following along someone else's conversation. You're paying attention to the cues they're giving you. You're making sure that football that's flying by you isn't hitting you, right? All those things you're doing in the moment. So one of the things I always advise people, if they're worried about certain features of their speech, is to record themselves having a conversation and go back and listen to it later. And then they can see how really obtrusive or often they fall back on certain features that they might be concerned about. And I think podcasters do that as part of their job. And that's why you're
hmm
really, really super aware of it.
yeah, I've tried to be aware of it, but not like over the top.
Mhm.
And it's interesting then, because I was thinking, I've not said like in this entire conversation, and then I just dropped one in there, and I'm like, maybe I've been doing it the whole time. I don't.
I've heard you say it a few times, but not excessively, but I have noticed it. Only because it's something people often ask me about, and, I a lot of times people will ask me about it in podcasts, and they'll be like, "Well, I don't myself use it," and I will always keep trying. Well, yeah,
Yeah, actually, yeah, 83 times so far.
yeah, I wasn't counting or judging, but I did. That's what I said. There's some very useful places for it. It's a really nice casual connector. Where people go wrong with I think is they maybe get nervous and then they really rely on it as a connector and then it feels like they use it a lot. But generally speaking, for most of us, is a very good uh, conversational resource because it helps with a more casual feeling cohesive conversation that if we didn't use it would feel odd. So you did, but you did it in a beautiful way.
Oh, thank you. I must admit, I did think at one point about doing tracking my like percentage. So taking the transcript, and then I can't remember. I chose not to go ahead with that. I thought I'll just do it in a natural way. But it'd be an interesting thing to track, because obviously I'm sure with AI and yeah, that'd be quite easy to throw together a tool that would do that.
Oh, it is.
Um,
It all does automatic transcripts for you, so it's pretty
exactly.
easy. I actually
Yeah.
have my students do that. They have, journal assignments every 2 weeks in my classes where we study some feature from a linguistic standpoint, or we study some process or a topic, and then they have to go and do real world linguistic experiments kind of, or record usage about that feature or about that topic. And so one of the things I have them do is they actually have to have a conversation with someone else, and they have to record it and analyze their like use. So not only how often do they use like, but which kinds of like they use, because like actually has many, many different functions, and there are extremely different kinds of like. So in addition to the verb like, I like ice cream, and the adjectival like, he was swan like in his dancing, right? Those are more traditional like usage. You have conjunction likes where it connects two phrases, and then you have preposition like, but you also have discourse marker like, and that's the one people notice. So like I was doing this, and then like he said that, and then you have also
Mm,
approximator like, which is where you're using it instead of about. So he's like 5 or 6 pounds lighter.
mhm,
And then you also have a verb like that's used instead of the verb to say. And so it's like an indirect speech reporter. So he was like, I'm not going to go there. And I was like, yes, you are, where it's instead of the verb to say. So those are
mm.
extremely distinct like usages. People don't really realize how multifunctional like is. And so I have my students not just count up their likes, but analyze exactly what kinds of likes they use and why they pattern that way. So I think for a lot of people, they're really stunned to understand that their use is very, very patterned and structured, because they feel like they just say it all the time and it means nothing. But it's actually very, very meaningful. So it's a really fun exercise. If you ever want to do it, I'll send you the assignment and you can use it as a model of how to analyze your like use.
Please do. Yeah, I think that would be interesting.
It's fun. It's a really fun, my students love that project. It's a really fun one. They're always stunned by their own use. They're always like, "I used it 150 times." But then they're like, "But I also," as I used to like exactly there, they're also realizing they use it in useful ways, and that really makes them feel better about themselves. So it's a fun assignment.
Mm, I feel like
See? There you go. Conjunction like right there.
I feel that was the one you added in the middle where you begun with like I said this, like what was that one called?
The discourse markers.
The
So when you start
discourse
the
mark. That
very
was the
beginning
like
of the
the
sentence.
most how should I say it? That seemed like the most low status, inverted commas.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that would be that one, the quotative like, the one where it's instead of the verb to say is also not widely loved, but that one is probably the most widely used. So people that don't use the other likes will often use the quotative like. But I would say the like that feels like it doesn't have any place there. So the one at the beginning of a sentence or between two sentences is the one that people hate the most. Yes, generally speaking.
Mm. So what does it tell us about status and why do we judge?
Well, I mean, it's not just about language, right? The whole world is about status. So from time eternal, you've had different levels of community organization. And the trick is there's really nothing better or worse about any human. There's only better or worse positions for those humans to be in terms of their hierarchical structuring in a society. So the people at the top who have the power and the resources, by virtue of their ability to command and influence things, somehow be start over time to be perceived as better humans, even though there's nothing better about them. There's just a position that they hold that gives them more power and resources. But it's our human nature to start equating having command of resources and influence with being socially better in some way, socially more uh, sort of valuable, right? Socially more adept. We start to see those qualities as associated with those people, but not only those people, but also the way those people speak. So it's just happenstance, for example, that the East Midland dialect, which was spoken in London, became the standard. And the only reason it became the standard, what is now RP or Standard Southern British, is because the printing press was using London norms. It also, the court was there. The London became a economic and cultural center, and those things made the speakers there more attractive in terms of their dialect because they had more resources, right? They had more cultural and economic power and more influence. But there's no inherent thing about the East Midland dialect that made it a better dialect. And in earlier times in British history, other dialects were more prestigious. So it really is just an accident of history. But what happens is we start to associate people that have resources and people that have more social capital as being more valuable. And then whatever dialect they're speaking becomes attractive because we want what they have. And that's really what elevates certain dialects and certain people higher than others. Nothing intrinsic, but everything extrinsic. I want what that person has. I want to be upwardly mobile. I want to have power and resources. I want to be able to feed my family. If that speech will get me there, I want that speech. And then just something that's purely a mechanical decision, I want to give myself more opportunity, becomes also a social valuation. That sounds better. Oh, it's a more pretty dialect. Oh, those people are more intelligent, even though that has nothing to do with the way they speak. It's just a happenstance of their position. But we slowly over time start to believe their speech features are actually better intrinsically, even though they're just better economically and politically and culturally in terms of how people assign value to them. Sorry, that was a deep dive into something that I would talk to my students about, but
I love it.
it's a really weird process. The way that we start seeing a word that someone will say or the way they say it as somehow meaning something about that person in terms of being a good person. And
Mm.
there's nothing about speech that makes someone better or worse than any other. But we as a society decide to value certain things. And when we start to do that, the people that have those qualities and have that speech are more valued than others. And that's really why we do this weird thing with status.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking a little bit there about like formability. How do I say it?
Formidable.
Formability.
That's a hard word.
Formidability. Yeah,
Formidability.
formidability. Formidability. And I don't think I've ever said it before, and I just try and say it on a podcast. I was thinking about formidability, and in terms of you've got physique and power, and then some people have words,
Mhm.
and they can use words to be able to win an argument or whatever and command power. And I wonder whether you have, if you know lots and lots of words in the English dictionary, and especially inverted commas fancy words or posh words, you probably only heard posh people saying them, or people with a more what's the proper term for it? Yeah, a more what's the word? Like developed.
That may have been more exposed to literacy, or we
Yeah.
a lot of times with vocabulary acquisitions related to reading, and so people that put a lot of emphasis on reading, which often has to do with, scholastic achievement, things like that, tend to
Mm,
have a bigger vocabulary.
yeah, interesting. And it's funny because I went to the like hearing those words rather than reading them. You can tell I'm an audiobook person. Um, so I so,
Know
so
how to
I didn't.
pronounce.
Pardon?
Right? A lot of times when people read and you might know a word, sort of like
Yeah,
formidability, right? When you read a word, you might know the word, but you don't necessarily know how to pronounce them. So I guess the advantage of an audiobook listener is that they know the word and how to pronounce it. So yeah,
yeah, yeah. I didn't find out I was dyslexic until I was like 19, and I'd always struggled with reading and kind of just never really did it because I just blagged my
hard.
way. I blagged my way as a neurodiverse masking thing. And yeah, but the reason I got into podcasting and books, and like when that all, we got Audible and all these things, like was totally life changing to me.
Well,
And
I hadn't really thought
trans
about that, but that's a really good
yeah, yeah,
positive of audiobooks for
it's
sure.
really amazing. It like in my confidence in my own intellect in the last, say, 10 years has just been like a sharp increase from when I was younger because of these audiobooks and podcasts and stuff. So
Wow. Oh, that's great. I hadn't really thought about that, but that's a really good asset of those books. I mean, they've become
yeah.
so popular. I hardly know young people that don't that read books. They all listen to audiobooks. It seems like
Mm,
the new thing is audiobooks to listen to. And it makes a lot of sense because you have a lot more time to listen to audiobooks because you can multitask. You
yeah.
can't really go for a walk and read your book while you're walking down the street. It's a little tougher.
No, no. I mean,
You
it
find
seems a
it
shame
without
because
running too
obviously
far.
reading is a different act, isn't it?
A different skill for I mean, I think we are now at a crossroads of seeing how people are going to live differently without reading because students don't read either. It's something that actually we have a lot of conversations about as professors. It's very difficult as a professor to get students to read. And
Mm,
audiobooks might actually help that because I think they'd be more willing to listen to audiobooks, but the time it takes to read critically and carefully, we just don't see students willing to devote that time anymore. So we'll see how
yeah.
all that pans out. That's a whole other podcast.
Sure. Yeah, and I feel like but I've noticed myself actually now, I think I listen to less audiobooks just because there are so many podcasts now. S
There's a
and
lot. Right.
yeah, and I'm aware of it, and I'm like, "Okay, get back on the books," because I think that's allows you to have much more and obviously here, like, I'm learning from you and my audience is learning from you, but, yourself, reading, uh, you're gonna get more than podcasts.
Right. Well, I'm giving you the highlights. Like this is the Cliff Notes
Mhm.
versions of the things I do. And in the book, I have the opportunity, and why I love writing books. For me, I don't want people's knowledge to be so superficial that they accept what I say without necessarily critiquing it or deeply thinking about it and why I say what I say. So I can as a linguist, I might have some authority because yes, I have a PhD in it, but I want people to also understand from their own perspective why the things I'm saying might be true or why the things I'm saying might have some empirical support. And on a podcast, I can't go into that. I'm not going to cite the studies or tell you the early history of man, or go back to your babyhood and really walk you through the steps of how infancy affects your language learning process. But I can do that in a book. What I'm telling you now is sort of the, key takeaway of that chapter or the key takeaway of a book, but I'm not telling you how I got there. And I think there's a really big value in not just knowing the information, but knowing why that information is accurate or interesting or how it got to be there. And that's what you get from books that you don't get from podcasts. But an audio
Yeah.
book does get you there. So I think it's the same kind of information content.
Yeah, definitely. I think because someone once said to me, and I think actually the point was being made more about short form content versus long form podcasts. And this person said to me, I just want the take home. But I'm like, I think there's beauty in them like marinating in it, and like you say, why you've come to that, and it's almost like you need that time under tension in your brain for it to really sink in because otherwise, you could just Google and ask ChatGPT everything, couldn't you?
Right, and that's not satisfying. As humans, I think we have an innate desire to know. We do. I always teach, that's the way I teach. I don't believe in telling my students information. I believe in helping them learn why that information is there. So I want them to learn and have emergent knowledge rather than me just handing it to them because I think first of all from a learning and understanding perspective, that's a better way to learn because it makes you approach other new information with that same critical analysis. But I also think it's more interesting as a human to just really be able to dig in and understand why things are the way they are rather than just know that they are the way they are, if that makes sense.
Mm,
I want to know what's underneath the hood. I don't just want to see the type of car that it is.
yeah.
And I think a lot of human nature is to do that. We are so fascinated by ourselves. If we weren't, podcasts wouldn't be around. I think a lot of people really like that more long form content of podcasts because, unlike a really quick interview, you're not just really scratching the surface. You can actually get really deeply into a topic in a podcast. So I think actually a lot of people share your interest in that kind of long form content.
Yeah, definitely. You said earlier about analyzing your likes
Ooh.
within a transcript. What are some other things that people or podcasters can implement to improve inverted commas their I want to say it's speech, isn't it? Not diction.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm not someone who worries about diction. I'm more interested in naturalistic occurring of
Yeah.
speech, whereas diction implies a sort of put on kind of self-regulating speech form. But as a
Okay.
linguist, what I'm interested in is just how do people speak, not to judge it, but to understand it. What are the mechanics behind it? So part of what I do is study how speech is made, from an articulatory standpoint, but I'm also interested in, what speech does in terms of how when we hear speech, we perceive it, how it affects not just um, how we understand it, but what we think of the person, right? And all those different things. So, I think my biggest advice as a linguist, because my belief is not people need to change how they speak. My true belief is people need to be more understanding of their own background and how it led them to speak the way they do, and be accepting of the fact that your speech reveals really intimate and lovely things about you. And it should be something celebrated when you have speech that tells the world something about you, and rather than be embarrassed. And I don't like the fact that we often feel self-confidence, lack of self-confidence about the way we speak. Sure, there are some of us that maybe don't like to publicly speak and, we might stutter or in those contexts more because we're nervous. But for most of us, we're quite adequate speakers, even if we don't sound like maybe the perfect speaker in our brains. So one of the big takeaways of everything I do in terms of public outreach is trying to help people appreciate why the way they speak has value, even if it doesn't necessarily have value in the larger market. So, maybe I have a very ethnic background and I speak with an ethnic accent. So I have a lot of students, for example, that are heritage Spanish speakers, and they might have a Spanish English accent. And they feel a lot of times they'll come to me and say that they feel that people notice that about them. But to me, that's a beautiful thing. That tells the world where you're from and what you value and who you love. And it's also a really, really important part of maintaining a tie to that identity. So what I want them to get out of our discussion about their speech is not, oh, you should be changing these things, but you should be recognizing the value of these things. So that's one big takeaway is learn to be not so hard on yourself for the way you speak. But if you do have features that are, in your view, getting in the way of job interviews or personal interactions, then one of the things that you can do is spend some time reflecting not just on do I use this feature, but actually analyzing how I use this feature. Because a lot of times we want to change our speech without understanding how speech works. And it's sort of that's like saying, "Oh, I'm gonna go fix a car, but I don't know anything about mechanics," right? You can't do it unless you learn something about the structure of the system itself. Well, so if you analyze how you're using it, that can help you come up with replacements, because a lot of times we need something else to stick in instead. So, for example, I tell my students who use a lot of like, well, if it's a quotative like, once they analyze the type of like they use, if they use quotative like the most, well, think about alternatives to that. And then once you have alternatives in your head, it's easier to put them in there. So a lot of my students will say, okay, yes, approximator like is what I use a lot instead of about. Well, so they'll say, well, think about using about then. If you have a replacement that you've thought of for that, it's a lot easier to actually replace it with that. But if you're just saying, oh, I want to cut likes out, but you know nothing about how they pattern, there's a bunch of different likes. So it's going to be really hard for you to do that. But if you go in with some understanding of the structure, it helps you understand how to change it. So while I'm not a proponent of changing your speech myself, there are tools that linguistics can give you to do it.
Mm, thank you. What about we spoke about moist. In an unpleasant word.
Now you're
w-
never gonna say it the same way again.
Moist. What are some of your own favorite words?
My own favorite words. Well, you know what's really funny is there's another word that people say is the most pretty word of English. And I actually do some every time I say it, I sort of want to say it in Italian. And that's the word cellar. I don't know if
Celador.
you know what it like the cellar.
Yeah.
And I also want to see a celladore. It just beautiful sort of lilting roll to it. And actually, from a linguistic standpoint, it's due to something called sonority, which is an acoustic feature that is about the air pressure that we're using when we say sounds, and sounds that have a lot of sonority. This quality means that they have this kind of flowing airflow as you pronounce them. They're often more singable because you have an open articulation. So vowels are very singable, right? It's a lot easier to sing, ah, I'm a bad singer, I'm just telling you. But
That
it's a
wasn't
lot easier
bad.
to sing vowel. Try singing a T sound.
T-
It's not
yeah.
very singable, right? Because a T has basically no
Oh, so
sonority.
if it ends on something that you could sing,
Right, exactly. So we
yeah.
tend to like languages and words that have really high concentrations of sonorant sounds. So Bella, Cellar. Those are I do
Mm,
feel like they're very melodious and they've been called by linguists words with phonetic chill factor. Which makes them sound very sexy. So that's probably why people love
interesting.
Italian. It's a very highly sonorant language.
Hmm. That the cellar door thing, and I've always I always thought it was actually the cell, like the cellar and the door, but well, it kind of is. Sorry, I'm getting. It's weird when you start breaking it down. I'm like,
Right.
okay, yeah, maybe I do like it because of that. Yeah, cellar door, cellar door, cellar door.
Right, it
Yeah,
has a
cool.
lovely melodious lilt. We're having word problems today. But really, when is a cellar attractive? It's not like anybody wants to go down into anybody's cellar. That's not a good thing normally if someone is inviting you into their cellar. So it's not even that that word has positive associations. So it can't be the word itself that's so attractive, right? But
Hmm.
the sound of it is attractive. I also really like words that sound like what they are. So I think, R's, I love R's. I think R's are a beautiful sound because they're so distinct in so many languages. There's
Ah,
the
we say
rolling
ah.
R, right? R. There's also the, Scottish burr kind of R. There's the uvular French R that's like this throaty R, in the back
Yeah.
of the throat, and, there's also the flapping R that where it just kinda very, very good, where it hits the tongue hits on the alveolar ridge, or the Spanish trill, there's R is just a fascinating sound because there's so many different variants that it has, but it's all the same kind of sound. It's just they all, depending on what language you speak, come out differently, and I love that. It's such a beautiful story of language because you could trace R back and follow it through history in all these different languages where it was probably at one point a much more similar sound than it is today. But as people left different tribes and went off on their own, they stopped speaking to each other and natural sound processes. So R is a sound that's very um, um, susceptible to changing over time. So it weakens over time, we call it, which means it gets less articulatorily complex because it's actually a very complex sound. And in natural speech, you're speaking quickly. And the point of your speech is to get a point across in a minimum of time and effort. So if a sound is really taking a long time to articulate, it tends to just get reduced over time as a natural language process. So over history, as groups separated, the R's weakened in different ways. And that's what led to all the R's we have today. So it's a really beautiful story of the plight of humans over the course of history and how language has tracked that. It's like the fossil of speech. So I'm really a big R fan because it tells a really really unique story.
Yeah, that's cool. Were you were speaking earlier about is it proto humans? Is that what you said?
Proto-languages, yes, proto-languages.
Proto-language. I just
I
put
might and
humans on the end.
proto-humans, I mean, early yeah, really what I meant was proto-languages. I might have said proto-humans, but I
No, I
meant
mean
ear
I probably wrote proto and then just scribbled humans because I was thinking of like Homo sapiens. So basically, I mean like like early human, right?
early humans and their languages, right? So before we've had written records of language, people still spoke, right? I mean,
Hmm.
language has been around at least 50,000 years, maybe 100,000 years. So we don't have records that stretch back that far. In fact, we really only have written records. The oldest ones are about 5,000 years old. So there was a lot of language that happened, at least 45,000 years of language that we have no records of. So proto languages are any language before that time.
Mm. Have you come across the book Breath by James Nestor?
Yes, I have. I've not read it. I have it on my bookshelf.
Yeah, it's great. I read it a few years ago, and yeah, all about nasal breathing essentially. And I don't know why I thought about it then, but it was thinking about he was talking about how basically we always used to have our mouths shut more often.
Oh,
And if you look at these tribes, I think there's like a tribe somewhere where y- they basically got these perfect teeth despite not having dental care, etc. And it's all because they're chewing things, developing the jaw and stuff, and then but they keep their mouth like shut more often. And it made me think about this proto language or whatever, and if they had them, if they were
there was a
umming
higher
and
propensity of nose sounds because they were
yeah.
using their mouth. That's a really good question. I've never thought of that. I know there are some arguments that proto languages certain well very almost before proto languages in the very early stages of language that maybe the jaw structure of early humans was different so that f and v sounds were not really likely
Hmm.
because of the way that we make F and V sounds. It would have where the teeth were positioned would have been different, and therefore it would have been very hard to make F and V sounds at that time in history, just from looking at early human jaws from
Hmm.
that period. So there's certainly some work on, how our facial structure changes the sounds that we can make. There's also some work that living in different environments, so more arid environments will be more likely to produce certain kinds of sounds than non-arid environment. So there is
Hmm.
certainly studies on how these various things will affect your speech. I haven't come across the mouth open, mouth closed one, but I imagine it's very likely it could have affected the more nasally types of noises that people would make.
Yeah. Yeah, it's something really interesting. When you're like, if you hear a conversation in another room, or and you can't hear like the high pitched stuff, but you can just hear the bass sound, so it's just like
Right, the muffled kind of sounds. Yeah.
yeah, and it's really fascinating because you can kind of pick up the gist
Mhm.
of what's going on because of these tonal shifts.
Right, right. They do something called low pass filtering sometimes in speech experiments where
Hmm.
they'll record people speaking and then, there's a format range in which human speech happens, and it's about 4 up to 4,000 hertz is about as high as human speech tends to be created at in terms of the hertz, and they can low pass filter it, meaning they can, kind of take only a certain part of that. And while you remove the ability to really understand the words, people often can recognize the language. They can kind of guess at some of the words. They can sometimes determine, things about the speaker. So we're actually really, really good at getting information even from a degraded signal like that. Not
Yeah.
maybe what the message of the conversation was about, but certain aspects of it, kind of like a sense of whether it was a happy conversation, a sad conversation, an angry conversation. Those are things we can get just from hearing some of the sound frequency.
Yeah, it makes me think, oh, how much communication, like the fetus would pick up in the womb as it's growing and hearing these sounds and communication.
There's actually a good amount of research on that. It mainly hears its mother. So
Okay.
when a baby's born, if within a day of its birth, it responds much more to its mother's voice, and it seems to recognize its mother's voice, suggesting that it hears it in
Right,
the
yeah.
all the amniotic fluid acts as a buffer, and so sound waves are filtered through the amniotic fluid. So it hears its mother through her body, and it's mainly the vibrations of the mother's voice in the womb that's feeling. It's a lot harder for it to get sound through that amniotic fluid from
Mm,
outside, but they do suggest that if they put a megaphone on basically a mother's stomach and speak through it, the baby does respond to that noise
mm,
and seems to react to it in ways that suggest it is kind of processing it as speech versus extraneous other noises. So there's a lot of really interesting work on prenatal language. I don't work in that area, so I know my knowledge of it is peripheral, but definitely the fetus can hear noises, but it will be primarily its mother's voice that it hears, and that seems to affect one of the reasons why it seems to be more attuned to its mother when it's born.
mm.
While it might sometimes get a peripheral burst of dad talking, mostly in the comfort of the womb, it's hearing its mother, which is why a mother is very comforting to it when it hears her voice outside the womb.
Yeah, makes sense. Valerie, this has been fascinating. Thank you very much for your time.
Of course. It was fun to be here.
Is there anything that we've not covered that you'd wish to speak about, or anything you want to tell us about?
Well, I think there's so much in language that it's hard to cover it all in one
Hmm.
quick one quick hour. But basically, I think the takeaway message we should all have is that language, no matter what it sounds like, is an incredible innate human capacity. I mean, that is something that is universal. Everybody has language of some form. It's not all oral, right? There can be sign languages, but we should sometimes embrace the fact that language brings us together rather than always complain about the ways it brings us apart. And I think that's sort of what I try to make sure I communicate in all the talks and books that I write.
I love that. And where should people go if they want to check out all of your work and your books?
Well, I have a couple books out. I have one that's already out called like literally Dude, Arguing for the Good and Bad English. And that's a really fun one about all the features that we notice in the language around us and where they come from. And then I have a new book coming out in April this year, April 2026, called Why We Talk Funny, the real story behind our accents. And that one is a really fun journey from, proto-language to modern language about all the accents that we notice around us. And I also write a blog for Psychology Today called Language in the Wild, so people can check me out there. And you often I'll show up in surprising places, but those are I consistently can be found.
I love that. Thank you very much, and I will make sure all of that is in the episode description for people to check out, and I would encourage them to do so.
Okay, great. Well, it was fun talking to you today.
Hey guys, it's me. Just a quick one before you get going. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the end. I really appreciate it. Don't forget, you can check out links to my guests via the episode description below. And a reminder to claim your free VIP pass month at InDeep. Go to indeep.com/podcast. That's INDIIP.com/podcast. If you're looking to improve your life and build habits, I really think you're going to love this tool. All links are in the episode description. Thanks for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.